Good morning. Would you please take your seats? We're ready to begin. Once again, good morning. We'll call this meeting to order. I'll ask the clerk to take the roll to ascertain the presence of a quorum.
Delegate Hanshaw, Delegate Capito, Delegate Queen, Delegate Zetezelo, Delegate Lovejoy, Delegate Canestraro, Delegate Holland, Delegate Sabonia, Delegate Deem, Delegate Pushkin, Delegate Foster, Delegate Summers, Delegate Miller, Delegate Eisner, Delegate Moore, Delegate Kessinger, Delegate Robinson, Delegate Fast, Delegate Fluharty, Delegate Overington, Delegate Byrd, Delegate Harshbarger, Delegate Fleischauer, and Mr. Chairman.
Present. All right, as I indicated yesterday, we're going to have some testimony to start the day regarding the construction project in the East Wing. A couple of comments before we begin. The Legislative Auditor's Office is in the process of digesting all the materials in the notebook that you see here on the podium beside the witness stand. It is our intent, and I want to make this as clear as I can, we will go through that notebook, copy each page, scan it after it's been assigned a bait stamp, which is a method, for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, of specifically identifying each page. So if one gets out of sequence, we'll know it. Once those documents are scanned, and we'll probably do it in 12 or 13 subparts for each part, for instance, first floor renovations, Justice Lawfrey's renovations, and so forth, those will be sent to you. So you can, at your leisure, go through them invoice by invoice if you wish. Now, the purpose of today's testimony is to basically give you a glimpse of what's going on in the process. We've also asked Mr. Robinson to address some specific issues or specific items that have come up during the testimony, but I'm not going to go through and allow questions of Mr. Robinson on each and every invoice. We'll be here all day. We're not going to do that. You'll have those invoices, but he will give you an idea of what they're doing, and at the conclusion of that process, the Legislative Auditor's Office will provide us with a report similar to what's been provided to us in three previous reports. So we're going to take a few minutes to hear from Mr. Robinson, and council will lead him through some questions. And we're not going to open the floor for questions. And if you have a procedural question as opposed to a specific question about a specific invoice or so forth, we may entertain those, but I'd like to avoid going through this invoice by invoice. So for instance, don't ask how much was the light fixture in so-and-so's office. Otherwise, we'll never get out of here. Okay, counsel, would you call your first witness?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The House Committee on the Judiciary calls Justin Robinson.
Mr. Robinson, let's go through this again. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give before the committee in this matter today will be the truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Welcome back.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Robinson, can you please state your full name for the record?
Yes, Justin Robinson.
And Mr. Robinson, just to remind the committee, where do you work and what position do you hold?
I am the acting director of the Legislative Post-Audit Division.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, the last time that you were here before this committee in these proceedings, I believe you mentioned that your office was in the process of trying to review and analyze and obtain copies of information regarding renovations that were done by the Supreme Court of Appeals. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is your office still in the process of trying to undertake or to do that project?
Yes, we are currently in the process.
Since the last time you were here, has your office come into possession of documents regarding the renovation that you did not have when you were here last?
Yes, that's correct. We were provided a binder of invoices and documentation concerning the renovation project here at the Capitol concerning the court.
And approximately, I think the committee can see it, but just so that we're all clear, approximately how large and how many pages is that binder of information?
It's approximately 1,000 pages of documentation and invoices.
Okay. And is your office in the process now of going through those documents?
Yes, we are.
Have you done any type of preliminary analysis with respect to this notebook of invoices?
Yes, for the 4 current justices, we have done a recalculation of the invoices contained for each section of those justices to confirm that the summary totals contained within the binder are accurate.
Before we go any further, I do want to ask you a question. With respect to the documents that are in that binder, do you have, well, let me just ask it this way. Is that a complete copy to your knowledge of all the expenditures that were undertaken during the renovations?
When we were first provided the documentation, we believe so. However, we were notified yesterday by the current interim director of court administration that this binder is not complete and that there were some items omitted at the request of Justice Lawfrey when it was prepared.
And where do we go from here?
Essentially, the court said they would provide the additional documentation that was omitted, so we're awaiting that information, and we will continue our path of reviewing the documentation and confirming that it's complete and accurate.
Were you informed of any other areas in this notebook that may not be complete at this time?
Not with any specificity to any particular areas, but we were informed that what we were provided was not complete.
And once you obtain that new document or additional documentation from the court, do you have any objection to sharing it with our committee?
Oh, no, we will absolutely share it.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, let me ask you, and our committee has been provided not a copy of the entire notebook yet. As the chairman indicated, we are in the process of trying to scan that to get that to the committee in electronic form today. But with that said, could you please just tell the committee how this notebook is divided up?
Yes, the notebook's divided into several sections concerning specific areas of the court that received renovations. Just giving it a quick glance, it appears there's approximately 13 areas that it summarizes costs for.
Mr. Robinson, could you please take a look in the exhibit binder at exhibit number 41?
Okay.
The first page of exhibit number 41, does that appear to be the same cover page or table of contents that's contained in the notebook?
Yes, it is.
Let me actually go back, and you had mentioned some summary pages. If you could please, for the committee, just describe what that notebook contains behind each tab, in addition to the invoices.
Okay, so there are approximately 13 sections. Well, there are 13 sections covering the various renovations. For each section behind the cover page, for each section, there is documentation and invoices that summarizes the expenditures made concerning those renovations. And at the very first page of each section, there's a summary page that attempts to summarize the totals of all those invoices.
Okay. Now, if you could please go to, let's turn to the third page and also look at the fourth page of exhibit number 41. I believe we are behind the tab of Justice's Conference Room. If you could please, and I believe page 3 is contains the same information as page 4, so let's go to page 4. Could you please tell the committee or just identify what page 4 appears to be?
Page 4 is a summary of the invoices for the Justice's Conference Room, and it details out approximately 10 invoices totaling $300,350.
And that is your understanding, at least from the documentation you've been provided so far, that that's the total cost of the renovation for the Justice's Conference Room?
Yes, solely based on the documentation provided. Our office hasn't had a chance to review the documentation behind this subsection, but yes, it is accurately stated that this reflects what was in the binder provided.
Mr. Robinson, I'm going to go now page by page just and ask you the same questions. With respect, if you could go 2 to 3 more pages for the summary regarding renovation of common areas. If you could please just tell the committee what your understanding from the documentation you have been provided as to the total amount that it costs to renovate the common areas?
Based on the documentation in this summary page for the common areas, the total amount for the renovations is $340,562.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to the courtroom. Could you please let the committee know your understanding of the total cost of renovations for the third floor courtroom?
Yes, based on this documentation, the summary page indicates that the total cost for the courtroom renovations on the third floor were $157,120.
We're now going to move on, I believe, by tabs into some of the justices' offices, and I believe it begins with Justice Benjamin. If you could please turn just a few pages and tell the committee your understanding of the total cost of the renovations to former Justice Benjamin's office.
Again, based on this summary page provided, the total cost for renovations to Justice Benjamin's office was $264,301.
We will now move on to Justice Davis's office. If you could please tell the committee your understanding of the total cost of renovations for Justice Davis's office.
This summary page denotes that the total cost for Justice Davis's office renovations was $500,278.
In your preliminary analysis, did you make a determination as to whether or not this summary page was accurate?
We did denote one invoice that was not included in this summary for $400 for shipping and labor concerning, I believe, the rugs.
So with respect to this summary page that was provided in the binder, you did find a discrepancy and you believe this summary may be off by $400.
Yes, by $400 it would take the total to $500,678.
Thank you. We will now move on to Justice Ketchum's office. With respect to his renovations to his office, could you please tell the committee the total cost for that?
There are two totals noted in this summary page for Justice Ketchum's office renovations. The first subtotal is $193,909.72. However, it's noted at the bottom that there were approximately $22,071 of charges that Justice Ketchum disputed, including one regarding the renovation of a Cass Gilbert desk. And the revised total for his renovation cost is $171,838.
Thank you. We will now move on to Justice Lawfrey's summary. If you could please tell the committee from the summary that was provided in the notebook you were given, what the summary was, the total for Justice Lawfrey's office renovation.
Yes, based on the documentation provided, the total for Justice Lawfrey's office renovation was $363,013.
We'll move on now to Justice Walker. If you could please tell the committee from the documents you've been provided your understanding as to the total cost for Justice Walker's office.
Based on the documentation provided, Justice Walker's office renovation project cost approximately $130,655.
And we will now move on to Justice Workman. If you could please tell the committee your understanding from the documentation received so far as to the total cost of renovation for Justice Workman's office.
Again, based on the documentation provided, the renovation cost for Justice Workman's office was $111,035.
We will now move on to the third floor women's restroom. Could you please tell the committee what the summary page indicates with respect to total cost of renovation for that area?
Yes, this documentation indicates that the third floor women's restroom renovation cost was $77,725.
Thank you. We will now move on to the third floor men's restroom. If you could please tell the committee the total cost of the renovation for the third floor men's restroom.
The total cost for the third floor's restroom, men's restroom, was $38,887.
We will next move on to what has been labeled a third floor bathroom that is behind the bench. If you could please inform the committee of the total cost of renovation for that bathroom.
The third floor restroom behind the bench summary page indicates that the total cost of this renovation was $98,513.
And finally, if you could please tell the committee your understanding from the summary page of the total cost of renovations to the first floor hallway here in the east wing where the Supreme Court administrative offices are located.
The renovation costs, according to the summary page from the first floor hallway, was $79,197.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I asked you a question with respect to Justice Davis's, that there might have been a discrepancy. I want to confirm with respect to the other justices' offices that you have looked at already and tried to match the invoices to the summary page. Did you find any other discrepancies so far?
Based on our preliminary analysis, the only incorrect summary page was concerning Justice Davis' office and that $400 charge. The others were accurate.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, if you could please now refer to exhibit number 42. As Chairman Schott noted, we have pulled out just a few invoices that may have been mentioned during the proceedings up to this point. Okay. If you could, on page 1 of exhibit number 42, please inform the committee of your understanding as to what this invoice represents or is for.
The first invoice in exhibit 42 concerns the wool runner rug costing approximately $58,100 that the court purchased.
Thank you.
It's from Carpet Gallery as well.
Thank you. If we could now move to page 2, and I believe it's actually a 2-page invoice, pages 2 and 3 of exhibit number 42. This also appears to be a Carpet Gallery invoice, is that correct?
Yes, this is a Carpet Gallery invoice.
If you could please tell the committee your understanding as to what this invoice represents or what this invoice is for.
There's a few charges on here, but primarily the costs associated with this invoice is regarding the purchase of the sectional sofa in Justice Loffrey's office.
And is that located as number 1, I believe, on page 1 of this invoice?
Yes, that's correct.
It appears, and I want to make sure that I'm looking at this correctly, that the sectional sofa itself, the total cost was $8,500, and then the leather that was added to it was $23,424. Is that correct? Your understanding?
Correct. That's correct.
And on the last page of exhibit number 42, if you could please tell the committee what this invoice is for.
The last invoice is from Carpet Gallery, and this regards the purchases of 2 Edward Fields rugs for Justice Davis's office.
Mr. Robinson, I now just have a few general questions, understanding that your office is still in the process of working through this notebook. Did you, and I'll note from exhibit number 42, it does not appear that any justices themselves signed off on any of these invoices that are contained in exhibit number 42. Is that correct?
That's accurate. I don't believe that's the court's practice.
In just spot checking or your beginning analysis and review of this notebook, have you noted any invoices yet where you've noted that any particular justice signed off on the invoice?
Based on our preliminary review and what I've documented and seen, I have not seen that.
Does it appear to be other people from perhaps the administrative office in the Supreme Court?
Yes, it appears individuals from the administrative office of the court signed off on the majority of these invoices.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, I'm now going to move to another topic, and I understand that there might not be much information on it, but we just want to make sure the committee is aware. Has your office already or previously been looking at issues regarding framing?
Yes, we've done some preliminary analysis concerning invoices we've obtained regarding the court concerning purchases of framing from the art store.
If you could, please just let the committee know where that stands or what you've been able to find generally with respect to framing.
In regards to framing, we've identified several invoices that range from the year 2009 through 2015 concerning the purchases of framing, all from the art store. The total amount of these purchases and invoices is $114,788. Our office has been attempting to assign these costs to particular justices or projects, and the result of our analysis has identified only $6,288.69 of invoices that can be attributed to a particular justice.
Is your analysis ongoing, or are you just having trouble determining from the invoice which justice that the invoice may attribute to?
Based on the information contained within the invoices, we are unable to determine particularly if any other purchases outside of the $6,288 were attributed to anyone based on the fact that there's just no identifying information within those invoices.
Let me ask you this also. I mean, I understand you might still be looking at this. If you could let the committee know with respect to the $6,000 or approximately $6,000 that your office has been able to attribute to a specific justice, what you have found so far.
What we found so far is of the $6,288 amount, there was $2,357 attributable to former Justice Benjamin, $998 attributable to Justice Davis, $597 attributable to Justice Ketchum, $1,337 attributable to Justice Lawfrey, and $998 attributable to Justice Workman.
And that's all you've been able to attribute to a justice at this point in your review?
That's correct.
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe I have any further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. In case you weren't here when we made initial comments, we will be providing everyone with a full copy of this notebook, and based on what the testimony has been here today, what we'll probably try to do is bait stamp each section in a different way. So if we receive some supplemental information that wasn't in the notebook, we will bait stamp it according to the section, so you can just add it to your section. That way it won't be confusing as to where it belongs in the overall process. And once again, we'll entertain some procedural questions for Mr. Robinson, but let's stay away from individual invoices because as he's indicated, he hadn't had time to really digest all this information and give you specifics. All right, and I'm just not going to go around the room. If you have a procedural question for Mr. Robinson, will you just delegate fast?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, could we ask the witness to just run down through those numbers that he just gave? He went through them so fast, I tried to write them down. The $6,288, and he had it broken down. By Justice? Yeah. Could you go through that one more time, please, Mr. Robinson?
Yes, Delegate, you're referring to the framing costs specifically?
Yes.
Okay, for the framing costs, we identified $6,288.69 directly attributable to justices. Of those, the breakdown is Justice Benjamin, $2,357.28. Justice Davis, $998.20. Justice Ketchum, $597.38. Justice Lawfrey, $1,337.66. And finally, Chief Justice Workman, $998.17.
Okay, and just to clarify, what's in that notebook, the large note binder in front of you, those are the supporting documents for what we now have, these summaries?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Miller, question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And this may be more for counsel. That he had testified that they had received an initial incomplete book and information was withheld by the request of Justice Lawfrey. Is there some way that we can document that and get that for our use later on?
I can follow up with Mr. Robinson with additional questions that can be on the record about that.
Okay.
Mr. Robinson.
Go ahead, counsel.
Mr. Robinson, when was your office first informed that the notebook that you have before you on this desk is not incomplete?
Yesterday morning, our office got a call from the current interim director of court administration, and essentially she had a conversation with one of our attorneys from legislative services and indicated that the information provided initially from the court with this documentation, this very large binder, was incomplete. And the statement was made that the omission was made at the request of Justice Lawfrey.
And you have indicated that the title, was that Miss Allen that made the call?
Yes.
Thank you.
Further questions, Delegate Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this the only invoices regarding framing that you've examined only from the art store? Are there any others that you have examined or have access to records?
These are the only ones we've examined through our efforts to identify expenditures made by the court concerning framing. We're still in the process of reviewing the breadth of documentation that we have, and if we do identify anything further, we'll update the committee and it will possibly be included in a future audit report.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there other procedural questions? Delegate Flashauer?
This is just to ask him to repeat something he said that I couldn't hear. I think in the beginning you said you went through the number of invoices and the total cost, and I got the understanding that some of the total cost of framing you couldn't link to anyone.
Regarding framing?
Person. Yes. What was the total cost of framing?
Oh, absolutely. The total cost of framing, and apologies, I don't have the exact number of invoices, but I would say it's approximately 30 to 40 invoices. The total cost was $114,788.
And are you going to continue to figure out if it can be attributed, or is there a way to do that, or do you think this is all you're going to be able to do?
I believe at this time this may be concerning these particular invoices that we have reviewed, the extent of what we can attribute to a particular justice. The information contained on the invoices just are simply not either thorough enough to provide any sort of identification, or they're related to something that may or not be directly related to a justice in the first place.
Right. Some of them could be the courtroom or something else.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Byrd?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. Thank you for being here. My only question is we all try to get our timing around here correct, and so did the court tell you that, one, they've located the documents are remitted, and two, how long it would take to submit to you?
I'm not aware of the time frame that it would require the court to provide us the additional documentation. We anticipate it sometime next week, but don't quote me on that. But, you know, obviously it's something we would like to get our hands on so we can complete our analysis.
But they have represented they've located those documents?
They represented that they're aware that documentation was omitted. Whether or not they've identified the particular documentation, I can't speak to.
Further procedural questions for Mr. Robinson? Delegate Pushkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You stated that on Exhibit 41, where you were giving the, I guess, the bottom line numbers on the expenses on the renovations at each individual justice's office, that you revised the number on Justice Ketchum's office because he disputed some of the expenditures?
Yes, the actual summary page provided in this packet of documentation denotes that Justice Ketchum had disputed some of the charges. Yes. Okay, and that's the discrepancy.
Okay. Were there did any of the other justices dispute any of your findings?
No, and again, it's not necessarily our findings. This is the summary pages were prepared by the court and provided along with this documentation, particularly with regard to the summary page regarding Justice Ketchum's office renovation. At the very bottom of the page, it notes the following invoices were billed and paid as work in Justice Ketchum's office. He disputes the transactions. This work was not performed in his office, and he does not agree to the amount invoiced and paid. Now, whether or not these invoices were disputed with the vendors that provided them and the charges were reimbursed to the court, I am unaware.
Okay. Well, were any other reimbursements by any of the other justices reflected in the in this report?
No, I did not note in any other summary pages for the other justices' office any disputed charges or revised totals.
Not any reimbursements, not disputed.
Reimbursements, no. And again, I'm not certain that the denotation in Justice Ketchum's section are necessarily reimbursements, or it's just the court's attempt to reflect the accurate total to the renovations based on Justice Ketchum's assertion that the work was not performed in his office.
Okay. Of any of the justices, were reimbursements reflected in this report?
No.
Were reimbursements made?
With regard to Justice Davis's office, actually, yes, there was some personal reimbursements that she made. I believe the total is somewhere around $10,000, and based on the documentation I believe you were provided, the summary page for Justice Davis, it denotes a few of these reimbursements.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Further procedural questions for Mr. Robinson? Delegate Sabonia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Robinson, did you Did you all, or are you able to, say, go to the carpet gallery and find out what they would have charged for, like customary charge for a sofa? I mean, I see that this is excessive charges, and I'm just wondering if that was looked at. And
if the question is if we would have the ability to inquire of Carpet Gallery what a typical price for a sofa is, I'm sure that we would be able to do so. However, we have not.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions for Mr. Robinson? Further questions? Mr. Robinson, the chair has a question or two. In Exhibit 42, there's reference to a 50% deposit. On one of the, I think the last page, it actually has on the left-hand side a reference to a check for the deposit. But have you at this point been able to determine whether this is in the form of a discount or there's actually a prepayment toward the total cost?
I have not looked into that issue, no.
I don't know how frequently that happened other than at the Carpet Gallery, but I would just ask you all to try to be alert to that and determine if it's a discount. Somewhere along the line we've heard, either read or heard about some special pricing that might have been offered to the court, and so we'd certainly want to know what it actually costs the taxpayers for a specific item.
We'll take that under advisement and review that.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Robinson? Mr. Robinson, we thank you, and Mr. Allred for your all support and our efforts in this time. We really
Thank you,
appreciate
Mr. Chairman.
Council, next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The committee should have, as part of the packet of information you received this morning, exhibit number 40. We do not have a witness here for that. Those are certified records from the West Virginia State Auditor's Office. So I just wanted to make the committee aware of that exhibit and to let you know that the cover page indicates that it reflects payments made to JRP Consulting, LLC. The committee has heard some testimony regarding a Mr. Pritt that was a contractor for the court, and there had been some questions about the amount of money paid to Mr. Pritt or his company. The documents in exhibit number 40 that you now have for your review and consideration should have those documents and the invoices as well as the payments. It, as just a quick note, and again the committee now has them to review, it appears that Mr. Pritt's company was paid a total of $167,280 for the time period beginning October 15, 2011 through March of 2013. And from the invoices, it appears that the hourly rate that was paid was $82. But I leave the rest for the committee's consideration.
Let me just ask if any members of the committee have questions of council just in general regarding that exhibit, understanding that council did not prepare the exhibit. It's just we've obtained these certified records from the auditor's office. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? If not, thank you, Councilor. Who do you? I'm sorry, Delegate Fast.
Thank you, Council. I'm just wondering on the cover letter to Exhibit 40, these invoices you have, like, let's take the first one there. The date's 3/26/13, and then the same date, 3/26/13, and the same amount. They have different document ID numbers, different vendor invoice numbers, same warrant number and the same amount, and that seems to be a pattern throughout most of this cover page. Why these duplicate payments?
They do not, in going through the invoices, they do not appear to be duplicate payments. That, for whatever reason, the date of payments are duplicative to the extent, for example, on the first page, vendor invoice numbers 33 and 34 were both paid on the same day. However, once you look through the invoices are for two different time periods. So invoices were, for example, the first two invoices behind the cover page are the first two invoices that were provided by JRP Consulting, and they cover from let's see here, in October of 2011, They usually go for 2-week periods, the 15th of the month through the 30th of the month, or the first or second part of the month through the 15th or 17th of the month. They all do at least, and you will note, I can just speak to the note in the change in the amounts. The earlier invoices that began in 2011 for each invoice, and it appears there were, and I can't say with certainty, but 2 invoices per month submitted, and each of those invoices bill for 68 hours per invoice. Those all appear to be relatively the same, 68 hours per invoice. And then at some point in 2012, I believe, around the summer, July of 2012, the invoices continue to be, it appears, every 2 weeks or twice a month rather, but the quantity of hours goes down to approximately 51 hours per invoice.
Well, just to clarify, again, looking at the first 2 dates, 3/26/13 and 3/26/13, on that day, was there an $8,300 plus amount paid total, or was it just $41.82?
My understanding is that there were 2 checks. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go back. These are the earlier ones. It is my understanding, and I don't know if it went by different check, but it is my understanding that those on that date of 3/26/2013, they paid 2 separate invoices. Each invoice was for $4,182.
And that would be the same throughout the remainder of this summary?
That appears to be the case.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Other questions for Council? Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Council, do we know why that the numbers changed? Was there, if this person was acting as a contractor, was there a contract that specified minimum numbers or a set number of hours or anything like that?
We do not know that. I intend to file a FOIA request with respect to that. We have not been provided a contract, if there is one, for JRP Consulting yet.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions of Council? Thank you, Council. Up next. You should have Exhibit 43 in front of you, and let me just explain briefly, sort of set this up. As I'm sure you all will recall this week, I believe it was this week, yeah, all these days are running together now. I believe it was this week the Judicial Investigation Commission basically issued a press release, and one of the areas that they were examining were these so-called working lunches, and they basically concluded that these working lunches that occurred when the justices were discussing cases and administrative matters in conference fell within an exemption and were essentially not a violation of the Code of Judicial Conduct. That did not really address a second issue as to whether the cost of these lunches might have been excessive, and so in addition to doing an analysis of whether or not all of these lunches occurred when the justices were in court or in these administrative conferences, we asked counsel to do an analysis. We were provided with copies of each invoice, and counsel will explain to you how he came up with this chart, and you can reach your own conclusions. Counsel, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the chairman stated, this is a summary of the meal invoices that we have copies of for the years 2013 through 2017. And if you'll look on the first page there, for each year there'll be 4 columns, and the date is the date that the justices ordered lunch out, and these were takeout lunches we believe were eaten at the court. And the second column is attendees. That's how many people they had listed on the invoice that would have been participating in the lunch. The third column, going from left to right, is the restaurant. That is where they ordered lunch out. And the fourth column is the total. There's not a dollar sign there, but that is in dollars and cents in the amount that was on the invoice. To your right, you'll see a notation. Yellow highlight means no official event verified. We cross-checked the lunch receipts against the court calendar that is posted on the West Virginia Supreme Court website and the copies of the administrative minutes that we have. So some of, when you look at the official court website and the official administrative minutes, there are some days where they had administrative conferences that are not identified on the court website calendar. So some of the days that were originally unaccounted for were taken up by that. There are still, I think, a total of 23 over the 5 years unverified is what we deem them to be lunches, and that means that we cannot account for whether or not there was court that day, a conference, a judicial conference, or an administrative conference. So for all of the other lunches that are not highlighted in yellow, there was either court, a conference where they discussed their pending opinions, a judicial conference of some sort, or their administrative conference that would have had minutes supporting those. At the bottom of the chart, you'll have a total cost for each year. You'll have a total cost on the days where there was no event that could be verified, and you'll have a list of the total, what we call official court days, and that is where they either had court, a conference, judicial conference, or administrative conference. The total lunches that were purchased, lunches on what we call official court days, and then the percent of days lunch provided. That is a percentage that is derived by taking the lunches on official court days and dividing those into the total amount of official court days. So the percentages are the percent of days that the court had an official event where the taxpayers paid for their lunch. So if you go through, for 2013, the total cost was $7,816.95 for all of the lunches. For the days in which there was no event that could be verified, the total cost was $817.55. And that accounted for roughly 46% of lunches were paid for by the taxpayers that year. In 2014, the total amount is $6,937.63. The total cost on days with no event verified was $1,012.29. And the percentage of lunches paid for on official court days was roughly 36%, rounding up to the nearest percent. In 2015, the total amount of lunches was $8,310.54. Total cost on days with no event that could be verified, $976.14. And lunches were purchased 58% of the time with taxpayer money on days that there was an official court event. In 2016, the total amount for lunches was $9,159.38. Total cost on days with no event verified was $852.68. And there were, on 75% of the official court business days, the lunches were paid with taxpayer money. And in 2017, the total was $9,996.21. Total cost on days with no event verified was $683.41, and the percentage of days lunches provided was roughly 67%. The total amount of all lunches over the 5-year period, which is not on your chart, but I figured that, totaled that out for you, that is $42,314.76. And again, that is the total for the 5 years. And the total amount for the lunches for unverified court events was $4,342.67. And the last thing I will note is that 2013, for some reason, is a short year. We only got receipts accounting from March to December of 2013. Mr. Chairman, that's...
Thank you, Counsel. Are there questions of counsel regarding this exhibit? Delegate Overington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would these have been considered a taxable benefit?
I'm not an expert in that, so I'm not going to provide an opinion one way or another. I think that's for other agencies of government that may speak on it or may already have spoken on it.
Thank you. Delegate Lane.
Thank you, Counsel. I seem to remember that for justices to pay for their own lunches is that there are ethics opinions that say that that's not allowed, and that justices paying for their own lunches on the P card is against the P card rules. Is it possible for you to do research on those, on my memory?
I could. I think your memory is correct. There are opinions out there that would suggest that this type of behavior would be improper as an ethical standpoint. But I can do more research on that and provide that to the committee.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Delegate Foster.
Where it starts in 2013, is that where you decided to start looking, or is that just where they started doing these lunches?
Those are the receipts that we have were gathered as a result of a FOIA request by a member of the media, and those receipts were provided by the court to the media, and then we believe that the media shared those with the JIC as part of the JIC investigation. So the documents we have came from the JIC, and those are the only. We haven't requested any additional documents from the court or.
And that FOIA request just went back to 13.
Correct.
Okay, I was just curious because I know Canterbury, Mr. Canterbury suggested that it went back before that, so I was just wondering if we knew when it started.
We don't have any of that information at this time.
Thank you.
Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Council, do we have the details somewhere in this documentation that gives us specifics as to who participated in these lunches, if some did, some didn't, et cetera?
Yes, I put the total of attendees in the chart, but I think almost every individual invoice will have a listing of who attended each lunch. I think there's one event where they didn't put who was there, but I think the majority, not the majority, all of them except for one for 5 years, the attendees are listed on the receipts.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Delegate Fast. Delegate Fast.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I understand. Yellow highlight means no official event. Are you saying there that there was no court in session primarily?
That we can readily identify, that's correct. And we did that by the Supreme Court posts their calendar on the official Supreme Court website, and it's pretty easy to find, but that'll list when they're in court. I think that's generally Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and then they have a conference day where they discuss the opinions that they're going to issue. There are also blocked off dates for judicial conferences that they may attend that may be held at the court, as well as periodic administrative conferences that they hold throughout the year. And we cross-checked the official court calendar, at least the one that's posted on their website, with the copies of the administrative minutes that we have for each of these years to make sure that there weren't days that we did not, that they may have met that weren't accounted for on that calendar. And there were, I think originally there was like 50-some lunches, 55 lunches that were unaccounted for, and when we checked with the administrative minutes, that reduced that by about half. But there were still 23 where we, based upon the administrative minutes and the calendar on the Supreme Court website, we don't know that there was an official event held.
So we really just don't know on those yellowed entries.
It would appear that there was no event held, but that doesn't mean that there's not a valid justification.
All right, thank you.
Delegate Fleischhauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are we going to ask if they can check their records, I think that would be appropriate.
If that's something the committee would like, then I think we can do that.
Mr. Chairman, could we ask if there's an explanation for those events? Thank you.
And the documents that we may or should be receiving next week may shed light on some of that, but not all of it.
Okay.
Yes, just a reminder, we have subpoenaed the JIC documents with respect to this investigation for which this release was issued. So it is possible that that documentation could shed light on these unverified event dates. But we'll follow up if it doesn't.
Thank you.
Delegate Sabonia, followed by Delegate Zatazalo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Council, did you look at the timestamp on those? Are they for lunches? Are they for dinners? Because what pops out to me is December 6th, the Bluegrass, $79.25. With tip, it might just be 2 people. What did they do did they discuss cases? Would it be just 2 people discussing a case? I'm just wondering, because most of them are for 200, and I think the most expensive was Soho's for $277 in September. So I'm just wondering why there's such a small charge, and who would have
The receipts don't
participated.
show exactly what was ordered. It just gives the total amount. I believe all of them do have a timestamp, and that's not something that I included, but I did look at them as I was going through it, and most of them did occur around lunchtime, between 10 in the morning and 2 and 3 in the afternoon. I don't know what they ordered, but based on court representations, I believe that they would order out and meet and discuss official court business, and that would include opinions that they were going to render, as well as administrative matters that the court needed to decide.
Well, since that one date is so low, I'd be interested to have more information on December 6th. $79. Was that for 2 people just to go out and have dinner and drinks, or was it? Why would 2 people have to sit down and have a paid lunch to discuss a case? I don't understand that.
It shows, John, it shows 13 on your chart.
But
December 6th.
Right. Based on my recollection, I believe that was purchased around lunchtime, because it kind of struck me as odd as I was putting it together that it was a lower amount than what the other amounts were. And I can pull the receipt and look at it, but I'm fairly certain that occurred during lunchtime hours.
Yeah, I'd like more information on that. Thank you.
Certainly.
Delegate Zatazalo.
I think I answered my own question as far as these lunches were only on court days, except for 4 that I can see. Is that for 2017? The first. So these lunches are primarily for court days. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And the other days might be administrative.
They could be. We have no way of knowing at this point.
We really don't know. Okay, very good. Thank you. That's all.
I think council has compared the dates with minutes from administrative conferences and cross-checks those. So we either they didn't take minutes on those days that are in yellow, or they didn't have a court date that was on their calendar. Is that fair to say, council?
That's fair to say,
okay.
Chairman.
Other questions of council regarding this exhibit? Thank you, council. Council, if you're ready for 44 and 45?
And 46, Mr. Chairman.
And 46, go ahead.
All right. Exhibit 44, which you should have before you, is a compilation of records relating to a case filed and heard in the Magistrate Court of Tucker County, Masters Pest Management, LLC versus Woffrey. This is a suit which was filed by the owner of Masters Pest Management for an approximately $530 bill, which he alleged was owed due him. Mr. Neat's complaint, which you will see on the third page of this exhibit, notes that he performed a termite treatment at a property owned by a defendant at 209 Center Street in Parsons, West Virginia. The defendant thereupon refused to pay for the work which was executed, which, according to Mr. Neat's, involved the removal of dead wood from underneath the house, installation of new wood supporting structures, and the administration of termite killing pesticides. Why, you ask, is this material before us, and why are we concerned with this case? Well, if you'll look at the defendant's name, you'll see why. This is Alan Woffrey Sr., the father of Justice Alan Woffrey. Again, ordinarily we would not be concerned as a committee with what Mr. Woffrey did or did not do with regard to a failure to pay his pest management company which he had hired. However, on the hearing date of this complaint, which was filed in the Tucker County Magistrate Court, which was the 29th of January 2014, apparently Justice Woffrey, according to the vehicle logs which we have, noted that he took a state vehicle to Tucker County for a meeting with magistrates. Such a meeting may have been held, it appears was held with one of the two magistrates on duty that day after this case was heard. What we have with relation to this case specifically, if you'll look at the very last page, is the affidavit from the magistrate who heard the case in question, Ms. Carol D. Irons. She was previously a sheriff of Tucker County and then served as a magistrate in Tucker County at the date in question, and then retired from her magistrate's position. On January 29, 2014, she swears in her affidavit that she presided over this case, and notes in Clause 8 of that those attending and present in the courtroom were herself, the defendant, the plaintiff, Phil Neats, and Alan Woffrey II. Now, according to Mr. Neats, who we do not yet have an affidavit from, but can obtain one, thanks to Delegate Miller's investigation, Mr. Neats says that he presented the case before the magistrate, and the case was then dismissed without any presentation by the defense or motion for dismissal from the defense. As you will note, Magistrate Irons does swear under oath in her affidavit that she rendered a decision of dismissal on the case, and that she knew who Justice Woffrey was and knew that he was indeed present in the courtroom. She had not had any contact with him prior to hearing that case, nor was approached, according to her, about any person about rendering a favorable decision for the defendant in the case. But nevertheless, the case was indeed dismissed, apparently without the presentation of any evidence on the part of the defendant.
All right, we'll start with Exhibit 44. Are the questions of counsel regarding any aspect of Exhibit 44? Delegate Fast.
Thank you. Do we know if the plaintiff showed up for this hearing?
Yes, sir. Magistrate Irons testifies, as will he if necessary. Magistrate Irons in Clause 8 notes that Phil Neats, who filed the complaint, was present on behalf of Masters Pest Management. According to a statement that he gave to Delegate Miller, Mr. Neats presented evidence at that hearing.
So they had a trial, a magistrate court trial?
Yes, sir.
And as a result of that trial, the magistrate stating that she had no contact with Justice Woffrey before that hearing found in favor of the defendant, the justice's father.
She did indeed.
Okay, and are we, or is there anything uneven-handed about the way this trial was conducted in relation to Justice Woffrey?
Well,
I mean, other than someone could say, well, he was in the courtroom and that was undue influence.
I think the committee would have to weigh whether or not the presence of a defendant's son, who is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Appeals of West Virginia, who oversees the court system of West Virginia, who has, as we have learned throughout this process, complete budgetary authority over that magistrate's office, whether or not that is undue influence or not. I think that's an inference that this committee would have to draw based upon the evidence presented.
Okay. Now, Justice Lawfrey didn't become Chief Justice until January of 2017, correct?
I'm not sure of that.
Well, I think that's been clearly established here, and she calls him Chief Justice, and this was held January 29 of 2014, which means he was only 1 year on the Supreme Court bench at that time, and was
that would make him an associate justice. Yes, sir.
Okay. And he doesn't, that's all I have. Thank you.
Delegate Fluharty.
What evidence was presented by the plaintiff?
According to the statement that he gave to Delegate Miller, he presented evidence and testimony concerning his agreement, which he concluded with Mr. Lawfrey Sr., that an agreement was had to perform the work which was then done, and that he stated that he had then done the work. No evidence, according to him, was presented, and nor does this Magistrate Irons opine that any evidence was presented by the defendant to the contrary.
But did he produce any exhibits, invoices, receipts of some sort, a contract?
According to his testimony, it was merely a handshake deal.
Okay, so it was just an oral agreement?
Yes, sir.
So the judge weighed testimony by the plaintiff, and we have no, let me ask you this. Do we have any case law, rulings, anything that says mere presence constitutes undue influence?
We do not, to my knowledge.
And we have no evidence that Justice Lawfrey provided anything else other than mere presence?
That is what we have, sir.
And this involved his father?
Yes, sir.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Further questions? And I think counsel also indicated a state car was used for this trip. Delegate Pushkin.
Just ask my question.
Okay.
Delegate Summers.
Delegate Summers?
I have two questions. First of all, I saw that the affidavit that she marked out and initialed that there were no meetings with any other magistrates. Is that because he met with the other magistrate in the county and she wasn't aware of that?
That is correct. He met, apparently, according to her statement, with the other magistrate subsequent to this hearing. So he did not meet with her, which avoids the appearance of any sort of impropriety, and does provide him with a legitimate reason, according to his own testimony, that he took the car to Tucker County to meet with magistrates, which was the rationale that he furnished to the court travel office.
Okay, and my second question is, if we're examining this on Justice Lawfrey, are we also looking at the other justices when their family members were in court? Were they present?
We are unaware of any substantive court attendance by other members of the court, which was done utilizing a state vehicle.
Okay, thank you.
And to Delegate Summers, if you're aware of any, please share them with counsel. We'll certainly follow up on that. Delegate Osmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Counsel, I don't know if you know this or not, but isn't it true that the other magistrate in Tucker County, Magistrate Barb, is the president of the West Virginia Magisterial Association?
I don't know that personally, sir.
Okay. Can we follow up on that and see if he was at the time that he had this meeting with Justice Lawfrey on the date of this hearing?
We certainly can, sir.
Thank you.
Delegate Lane.
Has anybody determined why the magistrate dismissed this case?
The magistrate did not furnish us with a reason other than that I assume that she concluded there was insufficient evidence on behalf of the plaintiff.
Was she asked?
You would have to ask Delegate Miller that. I'm unaware.
Will the gentleman yield for the question? Gentleman yields. Go ahead, Delegate Lane.
Did you ask the magistrate why she dismissed the case?
I asked her if she had a finding of fact. She was not able to provide that to me.
Okay, thank you.
Let me just clarify, the fact that we're presenting this information, and that's what it is, does not necessarily mean we are a suggestion to you that you weigh it any particular way. It's for you to weigh. It was referred to in some of the materials we had, and I frankly can't remember whether it was the statement of charges or the indictment, because it included a trip with a state car. So we felt, in order to give a clear picture of that, it was important to investigate it. That's what we've done with the assistance of one of our managers, Delegate Miller, and it's there for you to decide whatever weight you want to give to it.
And Delegate Lane, just to clarify, if you'll look, we do have a copy of the civil judgment order, which is the next to the last item in the packet. And the court simply grants judgment dismissing the case against Mr. Lawfrey Sr. There's no rationale given. It simply states that the case is dismissed.
Other questions? Delegate Pushkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It says that I can't remember the name of the pest control company, but they were represented by Mr. Neitz.
Yes, sir. Pro se.
Now, was he there representing was he like owner of the company, or is
yes,
he
sir.
Okay. Did we seek a statement from Mr. Neitz?
We can get a statement from Mr. Neitz. I think he'd be happy to furnish one to us. He's spoken to Delegate Miller, but I don't think it'll be difficult to.
Will the gentleman yield for that question?
Yes,
Delegate
Mr.
Miller does yield.
I've spoken with him, and the affidavit is pending with him, but he gave some details and his personal thoughts as to what took place in the courtroom.
I'm sorry. He gave a report of what he felt took place in the courtroom.
Yes.
Okay. Did he? We know if he filed any sort of complaint, if he felt that he didn't receive a fair judgment.
He indicated that, of course, he was ruled against, so he would have a little bit of animosity toward having a negative ruling, but he did not file anything. And I can even to go on that he made no correlation between Justice Lawfrey and Justice Lawfrey's father until I spoke to him. He didn't make that connection between the two at the time.
Okay. He made that connection, but did he express that he felt that he had received an unfair judgment because
He didn't make that correlation at the time until I called to ask him what took place in the magistrate court.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Delegate Miller.
Is it fair to say that regardless of the outcome of the magistrate court hearing, this documents him being in Tucker County for what appears to be a personal reason on the date that we have a correlated transportation log out of a state vehicle?
Yes, sir. I think that is fair.
Thank you.
Delegate Kessinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What was the name of the magistrate that Justice Lawfrey met with that day?
Mr. Barr.
Mr. Barr. Do we know what the subject of the meeting was? Was it an official meeting between judges, or was it just a personal meeting? Did he have a personal relationship with that judge previously? Or magistrate, sorry.
We have no record of the meeting from Mr. Barr unless the gentleman from Randolph has further information that I don't have.
Yes, Delegate Eisner. If you can answer will you yield for the lady's question?
I will yield.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Miller had the opportunity to talk to some of these folks beforehand, but due to my proximity to Tucker County, I was able to go over and secure Magistrate Iron's signature on the affidavit. At that time, she did not recall any meeting that occurred with Chief Justice Lawfrey, or then maybe Associate Justice Lawfrey, but some of the magistrate's assistants reminded her that he did meet with Magistrate Barb while he was there that day. And with leave of the committee, I'd like to go back over there and follow up on what that meeting was about, and maybe get some more information from the magistrate's assistants about what they recall about that day.
We'd appreciate your continuing assistance on that, Delegate Eisner. So
Thank you, Mr.
you can consider that unless anybody objects, you consider you have the authority of the committee to move forward on that.
And my final question is, Do we know if Justice Lawfrey did this frequently? Did he meet with other magistrates or any other judge throughout the state on a frequent basis, or was it very sporadic? Or
It appears to be sporadic from the vehicle records which we have.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Other questions of council before we go to the next exhibit? Other questions? Delegate Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Council, quickly, does a magistrate, and this is a procedural question, does a magistrate, or a structural question, does a magistrate work for or answer to the Supreme Court of Appeals? Are they accountable in any way to the Supreme Court of Appeals, as in can the justices remove a magistrate from the bench? Or does that have to go through this body?
It would have to go through the Judicial Investigation Commission, is my understanding, for the same for calls. It would have to be.
You're talking about remove or suspend. There may be a distinction there.
Well, let's start with suspend and then go to remove.
They can suspend.
Okay, but removal would have to come from this body?
No, I think it would have to go through the Judicial Investigation Commission, is my understanding. I'm not sure of that, but I think there would have to be some finding that the magistrate done something illegal or something unethical before they could be removed.
I think our vice chair may have an answer to that.
Just speculating, Mr. Chairman, other removal of county officials is, as I understand it, done by consideration by a 3-judge panel. Council, am I remembering that?
I think that's correct. I mean, I know we've had magistrates who were removed, but I don't have a clear knowledge of that process. We certainly have magistrates who were admonished and suspended before, which is usually what I've seen done, but I'm just not familiar enough with magistrate removal to give you a clear answer on that.
Thanks.
Delegate Miller, follow-up question?
Up to his questioning, would a magistrate be considered a county official since they've received compensation by the state of West Virginia, not through the county?
They're elected on a county ballot, but I'm not sure that they would be considered a county official. I mean, the magistrate courts are among the inferior courts, which are overseen by the Supreme Court. For example, in testimony here earlier, you heard Mr. Atkins testify to the installation of electronic equipment as directed by the Supreme Court in the magistrate courts to allow for virtual arraignment and things of that nature. So, I mean, the Supreme Court certainly oversees and supervises the work of the magistrate courts.
Mr. Altizer, do you have some assistance you might be able to give us?
I didn't want to butt in, Mr. Chairman.
No, we need your assistance.
The constitutional provision 8, Article 8, Section 8 says that a judge can only be removed by impeachment. However, a magistrate can be removed from office in the manner provided by law for the removal of county officials. So they're treated as a county official for purposes of removal.
Thank you. We appreciate your help on that. Further questions of council? Yes, Delegate Overton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an interesting case. Have we looked at other cases dealing with relationships between parent, child, husband, wife, or close family relations to see if there are potential conflicts?
There's certainly a wide amount of precedent dealing with potential conflicts and recusal and that sort of thing with Supreme Court justices. However, I don't think that we're aware of very many active cases involving the justices this committee is charged with examining the conduct of in the time frame that we're looking at.
Delegate Eisner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Counsel, you may not know this, not actively practicing, but I would ask if you know that it's unusual that both magistrates would be present and working on the same day in a very rural county like Tucker.
Yes, sir. I do know that would be an unusual fact in a county the size of Tucker County. I mean, of course, in Kanawha County, or it's not unusual at all, but I imagine in Tucker County that would be an unusual fact.
Thank you, counsel.
Other questions? Other questions of council before we move on to the next exhibit? Council, how about going to exhibit number 45?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Exhibit 45, which you have as a one-page exhibit, is actually, and I will hold this up for the committee's examination, a voluminous stack of material which was provided to us by the Greenbrier. You have a summary sheet before you which basically summarizes the documents which were provided to Delegate Miller, and these all relate to Justice Lawfrey's book signings which were conducted at the Greenbrier Resort property. One thing which I will point out is you will note that Mr. Brown, the General Counsel at the Greenbrier, noted that the book signings occurred on 5 specific dates. On the last 4 of those 5 dates, if you will look at, Figure 2 of the first post-audit report, you will see the list of dates on which Justice Lawfrey had reserved a state vehicle and had furnished no rationale for the reservation of that vehicle. I will represent to you that December 14, 2013, March 21, 2014, December 20, 2014, and March 14, 2015 are all included on that list as dates on which he had reserved a state vehicle and had furnished no reason to the court for the reservation of the vehicle. So we can infer, based upon that information, that Justice Lawfrey probably took a state vehicle to the Greenbrier for these book signings. At these book signings, in the material which we received from the Greenbrier, there are checks which were tendered in compensation for the sales of the book. The book sales were also promoted by the Greenbrier with some promotional material. The checks which were tendered for the sales of the book were not, in fact, tendered to Justice Lawfrey. They were tendered to Kelly D. Lawfrey, who is Mr. Lawfrey's wife. The checks were tendered on various dates at various times, corresponding with dates shortly after these book signings. There are also, within this material, W-9 forms, which are requests for a taxpayer ID number, to allow for the facilitation of the check to be issued, and which is another reason why we are not handing it out to the committee, but the committee can, of course, inspect these records upstairs, because that does contain personal information from Mrs. Lawfrey. The W-9 form indicates that she is employed by Reform WV. And the checks, of course, however, aren't tendered to Reform WV. They are tendered to Mrs. Lawfrey personally. That is essentially the information contained within Exhibit 45.
And for the members of the committee, we will, after we redact Ms. Lawfrey's personal information in terms of like her Social Security number and so forth, we'll scan these as well, bait stamp them, and send them to you so that you can inspect them for yourself. And Counsel, I believe there are emails contained in that volume of information as well.
There are, sir, numerous emails back and forth between the Greenbrier and Justice Lawfrey concerning the dates of the appearance, what times and places would be good for this to take place. I mean, it's a pretty voluminous set of material, as I've shown the committee.
And just to be clear, the emails are between Justice Lawfrey and the Greenbrier, not Mrs. Lawfrey and the Greenbrier.
That is correct, sir.
Once again, we're providing this information to you as a lead that we have explored and developed based on, I believe it was the Legislative Auditor's report. Once you analyze the information, you can give it such weight as you wish. Any questions of counsel regarding this information? Delegate Pushkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the only date that we see that was not during a time that Justice Lawfrey had a state vehicle checked out was December 16th, 2012, which would be after he was elected but before he was actually sworn in.
Yes, sir.
He wouldn't have been able to take a state car.
I'm sorry, sir, I can't hear you.
He would not have been able to take he hadn't been sworn in yet at that time.
I would presume that he would not have, sir.
Okay. Now, is there do we have any way of finding out who attended the book signings and who was purchasing these books?
I don't believe that we do, sir. I think that that would be very difficult to find out, if indeed it were possible to find out, because we're dealing with sales records that are now over 5 years old from the Greenbrier's bookstore. I'm not even sure if they have or keep any of that material that long.
So the books they go through the Greenbrier shop?
Yes, sir.
And so for all the sales, it's one check for each book signing that would go directly to Mrs. Lawfrey?
That's my understanding, sir.
And we don't know if the Greenbrier shop wouldn't still have those records, even from the one from the most recent one, March 14th, 2015.
They basically handed us, and what we received was the same material, under my understanding, which they provided to the federal government's subpoena of this material, and they gave us everything that they had.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Delegate Flashhour, followed by Delegate Fluharty, and then Delegate Byrd.
I just wanted to clarify. I think you said the last four had, when you were explaining, you said that the last four, a state vehicle was used with no rationale given.
One of those dates, a state vehicle had been reserved with no rationale given. I can't conclusively prove one way or another whether or not Justice Lawfrey actually drove the state vehicle to the Greenbrier on those dates in question, but he did have a state vehicle reserved for those dates.
Okay, and what about the first one?
We have nothing to indicate that.
Okay.
I believe that was before he was sworn in.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Delegate Byrd, sorry, Delegate Fluharty, I thought your hand went up, but it did not.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Counsel, what was the entity that you were talking about with regard to Mrs. Lawfrey? What was it called? I missed the name.
Reform WV.
Okay. Can you tell the committee as much as you can if there's any information on that entity, whether it's state, West Virginia registered business, out of state, I don't know.
Well, if the gentleman will be patient with me, I'll discuss a little bit more of that in Exhibit 46.
Okay. And then the other one is, do we have a record of actually how many books were sold?
We do not have a record of how many books were sold. All we have is a record for how much compensation that Mrs. Lawfrey received from the sale.
Thank you, sir.
Delegate Pushkin again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was a request made, and I believe it was responded to, about a subpoena to the publisher of the book. We received that information, right? So we should have the book, information on total book sales, correct?
We do have that information, but I think McLean would only be concerned once it had shipped to the Greenbrier. I'm not sure that they would have kept a track as to how the actual sales went, because I think the sales would have been handled by the Greenbrier shop. I think if you understand what I'm saying, that the publisher is compensated once the books are purchased from them by a third-party vendor. So I'm not sure. I've never handled royalties in the publishing field, so this is all new to me.
A lot of times, and I believe they're a local publisher, correct?
They are indeed. They are in Parsons.
I know sometimes with locally published books, they would give a certain amount to the author, and that's how they were compensated, that they would have to sell. Do we know if that was what type of deal that he had with the publisher?
That appears to have been the case. I've looked over the material we received from McLean, but that appears to have been the case based on what little I can discern from the stack of material we have from them.
So you said that appears to be the case, that was the deal that he had with the publisher. He received a certain amount of books, and he was to sell them for his compensation?
No, that he received a certain amount of compensation each time a book was sold, because obviously even McLean, even though they're a local publisher, still sells through online venues such as Amazon.
Okay. So for a lot of that, we'd be relying on records that were been kept by either Justice Lawfrey or Mrs. Lawfrey as to book sales outside of anything at the Greenbrier.
No, sir. I mean, we were relying on McLean Publishing for the records of the books sold. That's the only record that we have of books sold, other than what you have here before you in Exhibit 45, is the material upstairs from McLean.
But if it was if it was like a lot of local publishing deals where he received a certain amount of books and he was to sell them for his own compensation.
If that were the case, but I don't know that that was the case.
All right, okay, I misunderstood you. I thought you said that was the case.
No.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Delegate Fast, followed by Delegate Flashhour.
Thank you. Do we know if there is any corporation involved with his books? Is the copyright in a corporate name or anything of that nature?
I'm not sure how that the copyright on the book is. I don't have a copy of the copyright filing on the book.
Do you know if there's any corporation involved?
We'll address that with Exhibit 46 if the gentleman...
I'm sorry?
We'll address that with Exhibit 46 if the gentleman will just give me a minute.
Okay. And do we know if there were any other speaking engagements beyond the Greenbrier or at the Greenbrier involving Justice Lawfrey during these time periods?
I think it's very likely that he may have spoken at the Greenbrier. I imagine they've had judicial conferences and things of that nature down there, but to be able to say certainly that he was present there on any occasion, I cannot say that.
Is there any way to determine whether he was there on official court business or as a justice speaking engagement, just like other justices speak at a civics class or a graduation ceremony? Do we know, or is there a way to determine if anything like that was going on simultaneous on these 5 dates that you just gave us?
Yes, sir. I can attest to that with regard to the December dates. The court is sine die at that time, so at least with the 2 December dates, there would be no official court business which could be taken place.
I mean, even in sine die, there's been testimony that sometimes justices engage in speaking engagements, even sine die, and
within the material which was provided us by the Greenbrier, there's nothing to indicate that he was there for any purpose other than the book signings, which appear to be promoted through the Greenbrier's website and other Greenbrier media. There appears to be nothing within the Greenbrier's correspondence with Justice Lawfrey stating, for example, as you are going to be here for this event, would you like to hold a book signing? There is nothing within the Greenbrier's correspondence with him to indicate that, and the fact that there was no rationale furnished by him for the use of the state vehicle on those days would indicate that he did not, in fact, have a state purpose in going down there. That's all that I can say. We have no definitive way of answering that at this point.
Was the Greenbrier asked?
Yes, sir.
If the Greenbrier was asked if there were other speaking engagement events during the same time?
And what they provided us is what they had.
But were they asked?
You'd have to ask Delegate Miller specifically if he specifically asked them that question. I did not ask the Greenbrier that question.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, may I ask the gentleman from the 23rd to yield?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Was the Greenbrier specifically asked if there were any other speaking engagement during these time periods that we're talking about?
In speaking with counsel for the Greenbrier, I specifically asked were there any correlating dates that would indicate that he was there for an alternative purpose, and this would be ancillary to that. They were not able to provide any kind of information that would indicate that there was another event. Also, the chain of emails that they provided to us, which is rather lengthy, indicates that there was no set pattern to the dates. You could see from the marketing folks at the shops very evidently that the dates changed because something else may have came up or there was an alternative book signing taking place. So it was rather random as to what the dates were and why. For example, could you come on a particular day? Well, something else came up. Could you change it to another day? There was a free flow of information back and forth like that in the email chain.
Thank you.
Further questions? Delegate Lane.
Thank you. Counsel, this may be in one of the other exhibits, but I can't remember. When the justice, on these 4 dates, 5 dates. Was the state gas card used?
I can't answer that question right now. I just can't. I don't have that in
What
front of
about
me.
a state Easy Pass?
I don't have that information at all in front of me, so I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Council, you want to proceed to the next exhibit?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. This is Exhibit 46. These are copies of the Ethics Commission financial disclosures filed by Justice Lawfrey in 2013, 2014, 2015, and I believe for 2016. What I would like to direct the committee's attention to, which has been asked, is under business names, which is on the back of the first page. You will see Reform WV, which is listed as a spousal business. It's also on the second page of the 2014 filing. It is also listed in the 2015 filing and the 2016 filing. Reform WV is listed as a business under which Justice Lawfrey's spouse, Kelly Lawfrey, does business. It is indeed, again, mentioned within the W-9 form that she provided to the Greenbrier. However, upon the best information we now have, there appears to be no business license for Reform WV. We are in the process and hope by the next time that this committee meets to have definitive answer from the Secretary of State's office with regard to the business status or nonprofit status of Reform WV. Delegate Miller is engaged in running down that information for us. But we at this time have no information concerning the activities or even the business status of Reform WV. Indeed, what we have is a complete lack thereof at the present time.
Questions? Delegate Miller.
Mr. Chairman, as a point of clarification, and I literally just now received this by email, a certificate from the Secretary of State's office that after conducting an extensive search of the business organization database within the Office of the Secretary of State, they verify that as of this date, their office finds no record of Reform WV registered with the West Virginia Secretary of State. And that will be provided to council for distribution to the committee members as well.
Questions? Delegate Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Council, did you state that the tax department has any record of a tax ID number for that?
I don't believe we've made that inquiry yet, sir.
All right, thank you, sir.
And I think that's a good point. We'll follow up on that because I'm not sure that DBAs, individual proprietorships, have to register with the Secretary of State, but they should have a business license and file returns. So we'll follow up with the tax department on that. It's a good point. Other questions? Delegate Flashauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Council, I think you said to whom the checks were written.
Yes, ma'am. That was written to Mrs. Lawfrey.
Directly to her.
Yes, ma'am.
And in the documentation that you have with respect to Reform West Virginia, how is it referenced or where does it appear?
We have a W-9 form within the Greenbrier material, which is endorsed by Mrs. Lawfrey. And then we have the references to it within Justice Lawfrey's Ethics Commission financial disclosure statements. That is the sum total of information on Reform WV that we have at this point. It may be consider it by some premature to bring this to the committee at this time, but we're literally bringing it to you as we get it.
Right. And I guess one of the things that I was wondering, and maybe this is a question for our manager, is did we, and maybe this isn't an inquiry for us, but for the U.S. Attorney, whether there was an overnight stay at the Greenbrier, whether how long the car was registered, and whether that was reported as a business trip. Because we had some of that double billing, you know, whether it was a tax-deductible trip.
That's a very valid question.
I'll speak with our manager/investigator. Thank you, Counsel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just following up with the request that the chairman had made regarding the tax department, and I was looking online, and I noticed that there was a West Virginia Record article in June of 2006 about Lawfrey's book, and they actually list in the article www.reformwestvirginia.com. So if you're going to make a request, I think you might have to go before 2006 just to be safe. Because I go to sign on and that website's gone.
I was about to say to the gentleman, I've done a Whois search and used Internet Archive to look at that site. That site is now, as you know, basically being cyber squatted. It has been defunct, if my memory serves me, since about 2014, 2015. I can't be certain as to the exact date, but if you look at Internet Archive and enter Reform WV and do the search, you will find that at some point in 2014, 2015, that website went defunct.
I just wanted the request to the tax department to go around 2006, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Other questions of council? Delegate Summers.
Not a question, Mr. Chairman, but a statement that on the Ethics Commission paperwork that you gave us on Exhibit 46, it does not list in 2015 then a business name for Kelly Lawfrey as it did in 14 and 13, where it said doing business as Reform West Virginia. It's just a date to point out.
Thank you. Are there questions for council? Apparently not. Council, is that the last exhibit you're responsible for?
That's the last exhibit we have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. It appears to be what we're going to cover today. I want to just make a few comments and then we'll start the weekend early, I guess. Obviously, we did not have some of the witnesses we planned, nor did we have the documents we planned, but we are developing. We will have Ms. Lawfrey as well as Ms. Troy for further testimony the next time we get together. We will have had time, hopefully, to review the documents from the JIC and determine what, if any, we want to present and in what fashion and through what witnesses. We will also take the tour of the East Wing. The date and time are not yet firm, so when we finish today, we'll probably just adjourn until further notice, because it's either going to be on Sunday, is that the 5th? August 5th, or the 6th, Monday. The tour will definitely, council advises me that the tour will definitely be on the Monday, the 6th. The issue will just be if we have enough to justify asking you all to come down on the 5th, and if that's the only day that our other witnesses are available. So we'll follow up on that. We will be sending you volumes of information regarding construction and regarding the lunches and so forth. So part of our task for you all is to, when you go through that, if you see the need for further development of any of this evidence or for witnesses that you think would be important for the committee to hear, please reach out to our counsel. And the most effective way to do that is to, if you either call or send an email, send it to all three council. That way we'll know that somebody's going to get on it immediately. Just a reminder, I know sometimes it's easy to lapse into the role of prosecutor in something like this. Our job is basically investigation. Once we determine we have enough information, then we will, as a committee, decide what to do with that information and whether we want to convert that information into articles of impeachment. You can count on at least sometime during the next meeting for us to have an executive session to discuss where we are, what we still need to do, if anything, to review those standards that we have to measure the information we have against. I think there have been suggestions, and I think they're valid, that we probably adopt some definitions that we want to apply to the information that we've developed so that we can then examine that information in light of those definitions. For instance, maladministration, neglect of duty, those type of things that are spelled out in the Constitution. So we should have at least 2 full days when we get back together. Please pay attention to our emails. Please plan on at least Monday and Tuesday, perhaps Sunday. Council, anything further we need to do today? Any questions? If not, yes, Delegate Fleischauer.
I just wanted to clarify, before you had been talking about Sunday the 12th, but we are talking about possibly Sunday the 5th, and we are talking about Monday the 6th and Tuesday the 7th.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Hopefully that'll give everybody time to digest this information and our staff time to get through the information we receive from JIC and any other information we develop. So please, if you see need for developing other information, please let us know so we don't let anything fall through the cracks. Chair recognizes our Vice Chair. Delegate Fast.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, I believe it was, I brought up after Ms. Ellis's affidavit, Exhibit 36 was submitted, I believe the need to bring her before this committee. Now, I understand there's a federal case involving Justice Lawfrey, but I'm going to read this affidavit again, but just based upon the statement she said, I think it just opens up a lot of questions, things that were not addressed, and so I'm just bringing that to the chairman's attention. I'll look at that again. I mean, me for one, I still think we need to bring her before this committee.
We will be having a meeting following our adjournment today with our managers and our staff, and we'll get into that. I do want to correct something that I think I said before when we talked about Ms. Ellis, was that we were asked by JIC not to call her. I don't think that's accurate. I believe that they preferred we not, but it wasn't a request. So we'll look at that situation, and then if obviously she's represented by council, we'll have to work through that situation. But we will certainly take your request under advisement. Anything else? Vice Chairman Hanshaw.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adjourn until the call of the chair.
You've heard the gentleman's motion. Is there discussion? If not, all in favor will say aye. Opposed, no. We are adjourned. We're adjourned until further call. Drive safely returning home. Have a pleasant weekend.